Welcome to Teaching STEAM programs with graphic novels presented by LibraryPass and Comics Plus. This session will be moderated by John Shableski in conversation with our distinguished guests, Dr. Shari Brady, Tracy Edmunds, Jim Ottaviani, and Christopher A. Preece. We've received several questions through the registration form, some of which we'll address directly during the session, and we'll leave a little time at the end for any additional questions that may come up. You can also use the Q&A section to submit your questions at any time, and we'll get to as many as possible. We will also post a link in the chat where you can download your certificate of completion, and it will be available alongside the recording, which will be hosted at librarypass.com. If you're on Twitter, you can follow us at LibraryPass News and Comics Plus and share your questions, comments, and insights with us there too. Today's webinar is presented by LibraryPass. We curate high-interest, immersive digital content that helps libraries and schools expand their reach and engagement without breaking their materials budget. Our Comics Plus platform offers unlimited simultaneous access to thousands of digital comics, graphic novels, and manga in collections curated for elementary, middle school, and high school readers. We also offer a complete collection, including thousands of additional titles for older readers, to public and academic libraries. Learn more and sign up for a free demo account at comicsplusapp.com. For pricing information, school libraries can also contact Mackin, our exclusive K-12 partner, while public and academic libraries can contact Brodart or Biblioteca. And now, enjoy the session.
Thank you, Guy, for the intro, and thank you to our panelists for joining us today. I'll do a recap for you on the session. It is Teaching STEM or STEAM with graphic novels. And the summary says education isn't simply rote memorization, and that STEM, education, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, focuses on teaching skills and subjects by integrating subjects for a more practical approach. The addition of arts to the STEAM language gives the comics medium really a perfect foundation for this conversation, and makes things much more engaging for reaching students of all abilities. And so at this moment, I want each one of our members to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Dr. Shari Brady.
Hi, I'm Shari Brady. I am the co-founder of thescienceof.org with my husband, Matt Brady, formerly of Newsarama. We are both high school science teachers, and we incorporate pop culture into STEM, but we also provide outreach and training and just wherever we are needed to sort of spread the word of STEM in education.
Jim, you're next.
Hi, I'm Jim Ottaviani, and I'm the publisher at GT Labs, which is the imprint that I set up to start writing and publishing science comics way back in 1997. I've since started writing for other publishers as well, and we're still going.
And real quickly, I want to mention that Jim has probably the most unusual background and mix of experience coming into this. Just briefly tell us. These are my favorite parts of you, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, so I come to comics through, I'm not sure that's true. It's like, isn't this the standard route to comics? Start as a nuclear engineer, move through librarianship, and then become a comics writer? Isn't that how everybody does it?
Yeah, my neighbor did that last week.
Yeah. So yeah, that's my background. I come from a STEM background,
Right.
STEM discipline, and found my way into comics somehow.
All right, Tracy, I'm sorry, you get to follow him.
Yeah, I'm not a nuclear engineer. My name is Tracy Edmunds, and I'm an educator. I started as a classroom teacher and a reading specialist and an after-school science instructor. And now I'm a writer and an editor. I create learning materials in my two favorite areas are STEM and comics, and I get to put them together sometimes. That's what I'm doing. I'm also the VP of K-12 education for Reading with Pictures. Our mission is to support and promote the use of comics in education.
Excellent, thank you. And Mr. Preece, sir.
Hello, everybody. Chris Preece. I am a high school chemistry teacher, also the director at STEM Curiosity, which is a nonprofit I made with some of my educator buddies to promote STEM. Also work with Reading with Pictures as a director with STEM education. I write science comics for my classroom and publish some of those. And my latest adventure is I'm going to run for Congress for Kentucky's 6th District, U.S. Congress, so for 2022. So we'll see how that goes. Put some STEM education in Congress.
Perfect. All right. Well, congratulations and good luck for that. Earlier, before we started recording, I brought up several questions that had come in from registrants, and I've got a list of questions and talking points I want to work through with you guys. But I actually, there's several of these that I want to get to real quick. And also for those of you watching from home or wherever you are, we will be monitoring the chat room as well. So if you've got questions, just give me a little time to bring that into the conversation. But here's it doesn't matter what subject we're doing these webinars on. This is always such a great question. How do I respond to a child whose dad won't allow graphic novels, regardless of STEM or any other subject we're talking about? Do you guys each have a nice tight argument for this? Tracy, I'll go with you first.
Yeah, I don't think you necessarily can have a response for the child, but to the parent, I would say that research supports the use of comics in education for many reasons. People learn more, retain more, and transfer more learning when they read images and text together. Reading comics makes the brain work in two different ways, visually and with the text, and you have to integrate those. When you read a comic, you're making meaning, you're creating the meaning by combining those two things as you read. So those are my sort of top three.
I'm trying to think. Shari, you want to go next? I see Jim nodding, but
yeah, I have to agree with Tracy that the research shows that it's there, but to address the parent concern, I teach high school, so it's, we get away with some things that, you can just sort of kind of slide it to them and just say, don't tell your parents. And, if the parents, I think, see them reading, that's half the battle. And, I can't say personally I've ever run into that situation. We are very careful about, the images that we do use when we incorporate it into our classrooms. But I think with the explosion of, the MCU and the DCU, and it's almost become, just ubiquitous with society now, that I don't know. I can't say that I've ever really run into that issue.
All right, I'm going to go to Chris on this next one with, since this is a natural part of your space as well, the combination of now this conversation of visual literacy and STEM and STEAM, how do you find that as being accepted with the administrators you're working with and other teachers?
Well, as a high school teacher, we have a lot of reluctant learners, well, certainly teaching in public school, and any way to get the material to them. Typically an administrator is going to be excited if you have a new way to get that material to some of those more reluctant learners and readers. And the kids are typically a little excited too. When they don't have to read a textbook chapter, they can read, a 20-page comic or whatever. And I also put in a little bit of, worksheet or whatever, just to try to make sure that they get some of that thinking that I want them to do from the comic, just like the questions at the end of at the textbook chapter. The administrators that I have encountered have welcomed it with open arms. They're like, if you can get the material to them, do whatever you can, aside from whacking them over the head.
Right. So the next part of this is about the creation process, and I want each one of you to respond from your perspectives on this, but I'm going to start with Jim. The act of creating a comic falls into the world of STEM and STEAM, does it not?
Oh, absolutely. The art is obvious, I think. Absent the art, you don't have a comic book at all. And certainly the process of creating, well, let's start going from idea to plot to story outline, however it looks, to a finished, completed story, very much mirrors the discovery process, I would say, of both science and art. There's hypothesis testing,
Right.
iteration, and sometimes failed experiment. But in the end, you end up with story, and some of the best discoveries that we've had on the science side have also lent themselves to excellent stories, because that's how that discovery progressed. It's the story of, a lot of people know this story of the discovery of the source of cholera, mapping things out in a particular area, I think it was of London, and visually determining, oh my gosh, here's the nexus of this outbreak at this particular well, or maybe it was a pump, I can't remember the specifics here, and then expanding back out to sort of this public health realization. So I think it's a natural, in fact. The parallels are from the very start to the very, very end of the process.
Shari, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, so I also teach English language learners, and sometimes we get newcomers that are coming in and there is no English, and creating comics is a way to bring them into the conversation. It allows them to sort of get their thoughts on paper without that barrier, that language barrier that's there. Not to mention just the sequencing that goes into that process skill of sort of, we start with A and then you go to B and then you go to C, which is so important in just the design process and everything else that deals with STEM, from setting up a math problem to everything else, of teaching sequencing as a skill and teaching it in terms of creating a story is powerful, I think, especially for younger learners and your English language learners especially.
Tracy, is there a subject that you can't match a graphic novel to with the STEAM or STEM process?
No. No, you can do anything. I mean, I think the one that most of the titles and comics that I've seen that are published revolve around science and technology. And so the math, sometimes people overlook it. There are great math comics out there. You just have to know where to look. There's not as many. I would say if anybody out there wants to make math comics, we need more of them. But those do exist and they're fantastic. You can, I think any STEM topic, any topic in general, you can certainly do with comics. And I think having kids, especially, coming from elementary, having kids create comics to show what they know that they might not be able to show you in writing, especially when it comes to process. They can show a process through the sequence of images. And I think they could show you pretty much anything that you want to know if they understand.
Mr. Preece, go ahead.
Yeah, so learning science and especially chemistry, there's a lot of things going on in like, the atomic realm, or with atoms that you need to be able to tie in with what's happening, at the macro level. And I think comics are perfect in showing, what's happening in our real world and what's happening at the atomic level at the same time, and being able to really jumpstart or be a pillar in connecting those two, as well as the symbols that we use to communicate with between those two realms, like chemical formulas and equations and stuff.
I
I can just jump in.
Go ahead.
On this, I think Chris's point is an excellent one, and I hadn't thought about it in exactly that way until he just said it. But the ability to, I think what's now called code switch from panel to panel is so powerful and so fluid and so built into the comics medium that it makes it really effective for moving from a very abstract thing to a very concrete thing, just in the space of that tiny gap between the panels. I think he made an excellent point there.
I had a really interesting challenge, I think a year and a half ago, from a librarian at the New Lots Library in the New York system. And she had these two girls who were trying to master mathematics. And she said the only thing she couldn't find, I found No Starch had a great line of math-based comics. And then I found one that deals with trigonometry called Math Girls. And it was brilliant. And it turns out these two girls were trying to improve their testing scores. They went from 45th percentile to 95 percentile. They were in 7th grade. And it was all they wanted to do was find anything that was manga related for mathematics, which I thought was really pretty cool. And that was, so of course, you know, that takes me back to why I asked that question about subjects that you can't teach aside from PE with the format. We have several questions from folks who are asking for books that can be recommended, which is always kind of that open-ended thing. Like, to me, it's okay, what subject are you thinking of? And now since, Jim, since you started publishing, there's probably, I don't know, 15,000 titles more that fall into this category, right?
I don't know the number. You've got a better handle on that than I do. But yeah, I remember after the first book I did, someone said, "How many more can there be about science?" It's like, really? Are you kidding me? There's enough for 100 of me for 100 lifetimes, and that's only if science stopped right now.
Right.
And it's not gonna. So yeah, I couldn't even begin to count at this point.
Chris, did you want to add on to that, or you've seen this field expand as well, right?
Yeah, it has expanded a lot. In fact, when I started teaching high school, this is when I started to dig into science comics because I wanted to reach to my students. And I searched, I found Jim's comics. He's written a lot of amazing stuff. Suspended Language is one of my favorites. Niels Bohr is my favorite scientist. But I find it amazing that there is a huge gap between, like, there were science comics in the 1940s, and then science was put in comics in a little bit in the 50s and 60s, and then it seems like it just vanished mostly. And then there was a little bit of pop up in the 80s with some like Radio Shack comics, and then and just sparse little bits here and there. And then, Jim starts making these awesome science graphic novels, and boom, right after that, it's like, hey, we can do this.
Shari, you and your husband have seen the catalog kind of expand considerably where you're in your space too, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it's, the biggest, and I don't want to, sort of complain, but our biggest complaint about it is, two things. One is, alignment, right? As a public school teacher, we get that drilled, into our heads, down our throats, that, we teach anything, an administrator walks in, how is this aligning to the standards? So, it is sometimes difficult to find graphic novels that, tightly align to exactly what it is you're teaching. And then the other thing is access. And so I think with, the digital comics that have come out, I think access is not as much of an issue, but it's difficult to get a class set of graphic novels, especially, I teach at a Title I school, and it is difficult to get it into the hands of some of our students when, they're on free and reduced lunch and there is no extra money to buy a graphic novel to, even if it's for class. And what I would like to see is publishers giving, short little, PDFs that can be downloaded that is, just a clip of the story, or, a concentrated piece that is sort of free and available, that can be printed out, black and white, folded up, ash can size thing that can be given away to increase that access and make it even more accessible to, I think because the whole point of STEM when it developed in the 2000s was in the early 2000s was to increase equity. And so I think, we're leaving a lot on the table when, we have all of these wonderful graphic novels that just, we can't get them into the hands of the kids that really need them.
I have a couple of resources for that if you'd like. One is called First Book, and I don't know if First Book goes as high as high school. Do you know, John? They're an organization that provides books for Title I schools, many free of charge, but also some at very low cost in their marketplace. So that's one to look into.
Stella Bromley says, yes, it does.
Okay, there you go. So check out First Book. If your school qualifies, you can definitely get books that way. The other thing is there is a burgeoning world of science communication through comics online, short form mostly, and all free. A cartoonist by the name of Maki Naro has a site where he posts all his work. It's fantastic. NPR has a lot of comics now. So there are places you can look online, and I try to pull together a list where there are digital short form comics. And,
and that's what I think it's getting better.
It is definitely growing. Yeah. But I hear your frustration for sure.
Oh, and real quick, I want to do a public service announcement to any publishers who may be listening. Please keep the books in print. Don't let them go to print. Leave them print on demand, whatever it takes, but please keep them in print. Neil McLaughlin throws dragon hoops into the conversation.
That was for PE. He's right.
Yeah, PE. Thank you. Okay, got it. Thanks, Neil. Yes, that does cover PE. Dragon Hoops by Gene Yang follows the path his high school's basketball team takes on their way to the state championships. Tracy, can you put that resource in?
Yes, I'm pulling that up right now.
Yes, we are paying attention.
There you go.
Yeah, keep them in print, and firstbook.org. There you go. Thank you, Tracy, for popping that in there. And it was funny when I looked and saw Dragon Hoops, I was like, okay, we're having a STEM conversation. But I was like, wait a second, arts and sports. Okay, cool. That covers that. Is there, for each one of you, what are the books that really surprised you as you became comfortable with this conversation of defending or arguing the case of using graphic novels in this environment? I'll start with Shari.
Honestly, my favorite go-to ones are the first, second books. I think, we have the whole, and in fact, we're trying to even, develop educational content, even if it's just in our classrooms, to sort of go along with those, because they are so well done and so tightly aligned.
Do you remember seeing the Larry Gonick books?
Yes. And so, those as well, but, for an entry level to be able to get, my upper level students, my AP students, that type of thing. Yes, Gonick is God. But, for my English language learners and that sort of thing, those first, second books are, they are spot on for what that sort of broad entry level graphic novel.
Go ahead, Jim.
Oh gosh, I mean, I think you phrased the question as surprised, and I'm hard to surprise with this because I'm already a true believer. But I guess I have to declare a bias. The ones that I often push, just a couple specific titles. I was going to say science comics, but Shari already took care of that.
We'll have to put that in the chat, by the way.
But I would add Maris Wicks. Her book Human Body Theater is a terrific overview of the human body, not surprisingly. Jay Hostler's Way of the Hive. He reworked basically a book from many years ago called Clan Apis, and now it's called Way of the Hive. But like I said, I feel like I need to declare a bias because I consider Jay and Maris friends, and I've collaborated with Maris a couple times already on science graphic novels of our own. So.
Go ahead, Trace. You got anything?
Surprising. What's surprising to me is that I keep discovering more. Every time I think I've seen most of what's out there, I find more stuff from publishers I didn't know existed. It happens all the time. For some reason, I started getting into doing learning about prehistory for kids through comics. Lucy and Andy Neanderthal by Jeff Brown. That series, he works with an evolutionary biologist, and that has a ton of science in it. There's a series of books called, I've got it sitting here, Mad Scientist Academy. Great stuff, full of science. A new series, it's called Earth Before Us by Abby Howard, and it's all about this girl who goes with a paleontologist into the past. So there's just, every time I turn around, I'm finding more stuff. You know, if you have a specific topic you want to teach, just start looking, because they are out there.
I wanted to answer real quick. Patricia Yee is asking about titles for high school math, such as algebra, geometry, and algebra 2. Go to No Starch Press and you'll see a bunch of his stuff there, and you'll make Bill happy. He started doing those back in like 2005, and he was way ahead of the planet on using manga as a teaching tool. And then one more way is Stella Bromley added a link for believeinreading.org. Says there's an organization provides grants for small donations to get students reading. So okay. Believeinreading.org. Thank you for that, Stella. Really appreciate it. And I popped a link in for the science comics from Macmillan as well. Let me go back to some of the other questions we have here for the panel. Is there a distinction between YA and college age STEM or STEAM graphic novels?
Can I answer the previous question real quick?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
There's a comic that I use in my freshman science class to help teach climate change. It's called Climate Change by Felipe Squarzoni. And he's a journalist who goes through the process of trying to understand what climate change is and looking at all the data and really doing a deep dive and turning that into a comic. And it's pretty awesome. And I expose my students to that. Well, one, because, it's over climate change and that does align with our standards. So I just wanted to plug Climate Change comics.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And real quick, at the end of this, I give everybody what I call 30 seconds of shameless self-promotion, because all of you have stuff that you're working on. So you get a chance to sing about those things. Let's go back to that. How does one teach STEM with graphic novels? I know that's kind of generic, but is there a starting point as an educator? And we'll go with Tracy to start with. What is the gateway book that you recommend for teachers to start with?
I don't know if there's a gateway book. I think you have to look at what you're trying to teach. What is the content or the cross-cutting concept or the scientific practice that you're trying to teach, and then find a book like Shari mentioned, alignment. They find a book that sort of addresses that and then work that in. You can use them as an introduction. Those science comics from Macmillan are great for that. It's a great introduction to something. You can use a piece of a comic to address one particular concept or one particular standard. Just pull out the part that you need and use that part. You can have kids create comics as formative evaluation along the way, summative evaluation at the end, to show you what they know and what they've learned about processes and concepts. So they're tools just like anything else, and I think you can use them in a lot of different ways. I will say there are different ways to make a science comic. So there are the explanatory comics. Usually they have some kind of a host that walks you through something and tells you how to do it. There are biography comics. Jim does amazing with these. They're biographies of scientists that get you into the scientific process that they use and the way they think. And there are stories where they embed science within the story itself. Not necessarily that it's about science, but that the scientific concepts are embedded within the story. So you have to sort of look at what you're trying to teach and match that up to the kind of comic that you want to use.
Shari, did you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the alignment is always the first thing that you've got to go for. And, and don't get stuck in the idea that you have to use an entire graphic novel. That, like Tracy said, you can use a piece of it. I mean, we've used even just a panel of a comic story to sort of, start a lesson, as getting the kids talking about and getting them to explain, well, what do you see in this panel? What is the science in this panel? And it's not necessarily even to have them reading the story, but it's just using that comic as a visual element and part of your lesson. So there's all kinds of ways that they can be integrated. They don't necessarily have to, you don't think you have to have, I'll have to have them read an entire book. No, that's not necessary.
Trying to recall, there's a famous interview. God, the guy was a physicist, said that the thing that got him into the science was a scene in Watchmen that describes the time-space continuum. And I was like, I did not see that when I read Watchmen, so I had to go back and Watchmen is like one of the most recommended books of all time. But to me, that's like somebody says, I'm interested in music, and we hand them Beethoven and say, go ahead and learn to play this. And with that, one of the questions we have is, how do we tie activities to a particular book? And I oftentimes I'll hear somebody, a veteran teacher, say, well, use X, Y, and Z, but I think there's a better entry point for that. Shari, do you want to follow up with that? And then I want each one of you to answer.
You mean in terms?
Well, their question is, how do we tie activities into a particular book? That's such a broad question, but I think it depends on the setting.
Like I said, I think it all goes back to what you're teaching and the level of your students. A lot of it is just kind of serendipitous. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but there's, so many times, the greatest lessons just kind of happen because you sort of see the connections and you're talking to your students and you find that common ground, and, there's a story or a movie or, something that is happening at that time, and you go, hey, wait, did you see that? And then, the conversation can start from there. But to say, sort of like block it out like a strategy of, here's step one, step two, I'm not real sure how. Maybe other people have better ideas on how to do that.
Hey, Jim, with the books that you do,
Mm-hmm.
do you, and in the process, do you see them also as teaching tools, or is that something that occurs to you after the book is completed?
A little bit, but I see the teaching aspect as a bonus side effect. I'm not sure what the right way to put it would be. The main idea is to tell the story of an interesting life. Sometimes it's the story of an interesting and famous life, and it feels wrong to tell the story of Stephen Hawking without touching on the reason why he was famous in the first place. And that's for his discoveries and for his theories and his ideas. So just going through the easy, most visible part doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You have to show people why this scientist or this person deserves a story about them, why we should care. And so by doing that, you do get into some of the science, and I hope it sparks some interest and maybe some learning. But I got to confess that that's not the main point. The main point is to try to tell a good story for the type of books that I do, anyway.
Right. Well, we have another publisher on our panel here. I don't think we revealed, Chris, that you're also a publisher as well. When you set out to do your books, do you start out with this lesson in mind, or does that evolve in the process of development for you?
The lesson, I guess, evolves from whatever content. Like typically I have a content in mind that I want to cover, and then I start creating a story from that. And the most recent thing I did, Fire Salt Slime, like I've really noticed that there's some of my students need a little bit of a kickstart in how to explore, how to be curious, and know that it's okay to be curious, in exploring science. And so I started writing or wrote a couple stories in there just about fire and about salt and exploring those and how could they explore those at home. And then I also tied that into lessons in my classroom. So I would have them read the comic, and then, I'd have this, I would have a series of lab equipment out for them and be like, explore, see what you can figure out about these salts or this chemical reaction or what have you.
So Tracy, in this process for you, how hard is it now? And also Tracy and I are currently on the jury for an award. How hard is it for you to look at a book and not immediately associate it as a teaching tool?
Yeah, that's what I do all the time. I mean, one of the things I do is I write teaching guides and lessons to go with graphic novels, some of them science-based. Yeah, I'm always, and I think elementary teachers approach this maybe a bit differently, especially with the younger kids, because we use picture books all the time. And we're used to taking a picture book and taking the concepts from that and bringing it out into our curriculum. So maybe it might be a little bit of something that we're used to doing rather than at an upper level. You guys probably aren't used to doing, using books and pulling concepts out that way. What was the other part of your question, John?
You got it.
I don't know.
Good. Shari, in your environment, what are the resources you go to when you're searching for books to work with? And does your librarian play a role?
Well, like Tracy said, it's not as common at the upper levels because we have our textbooks that we're supposed to use. But I think it's more we look for the pictures and the comics and the that fit with what we're teaching. I don't know if we look for a book that is, it's we come at it from the other side.
Right.
It depends on the school. Schools vary widely in, it just depends on who your librarian is. And if your librarian is someone who is into comics and manga and graphic novels and YA, then, yes, the library will be full of it. I've taught at schools where the library was just phenomenal and the librarian was phenomenal in getting me whatever I needed. High school, the libraries are more media centers, right? They're more computer labs than they are libraries where kids go to read, which makes me sad. But, I think something Matt and I have found when we present at, because we kind of present at Comic-Cons, but then we also present at, National Science Teacher Association or National Science Teaching Association, they changed their name. We find this intersection between comics fans and science teachers, right? And there's this overlap. And I think giving them permission to use comics in their classroom at the high school level is sort of our mission, to be able to say, look, it's okay to do this. And, you're not going to be frowned upon and you're not going to be written up and you're not going to get a bad evaluation, but, just sort of giving them the permission to use comics. And I think the more we can get that out there, and I think we will start to see it take off at the upper levels. I do teach, college level classes. I teach methods, but, I don't think graphic novels have really made it up to those upper echelon quite yet, but I think they're getting there.
Chris, what about your experience? Is there a relationship with your librarian for this, or are you doing a lot of your own research to find the books that you use?
I do my own research. I've talked to the librarian about getting some books into the library for kids to read. But in terms of finding out about different science books or STEM books, it's all me digging around trying to find what's available.
I was having a conversation with one of the NCTE, pick an acronym. It was somewhere in St. Louis. And they were like, well, how do you search for these books? I was like, subject plus graphic novel. And you'll get 1.5 million hits right off the bat. But then there's also got to be those qualifiers for that book that comes up. And we talked about this earlier, keep the book in print. but then there's some also key indicators. What do you look for, Chris, with anytime you're doing a search and you find a book that falls into that subject area that you want? What are the key things that you look for that qualify that book for what you want to do? I think I lost him. Shari, do you want to go ahead and take that?
So what are we looking for?
Yeah, when you do a search on books, and then Chris came back on, we'll come back.
I think we're looking for alignment. You know, I mean, that's, you know, you're looking for the content, the concept that you're trying to get across, and then you hope that there's some intersection there that you can find.
Hey, Jim, you get a shout out from John Meyer at Penn State. I've seen college faculty use Jim's Feynman and Bone Sharp's Cowboys and Thunder Lizards. Oh, also Jay's Sandwalk Adventures, which is pretty cool. That's Penn State, man. That's all right.
Thank you. Thanks, John. And hi, good to see you, sort of.
Janice is asking, why do graphic novels go out of print so quickly? Mr. Publisher, can you answer that one?
I can't answer that one well because I've kept everything in print. That's one of the advantages of being a self-publisher. You can decide whether and how much effort you want to put into a backlist. So I can't speak for, you know, the Macmillans, the Hachette's, Abrams, Simon and Schuster's of the world, and I'm working for all of those folks. They are more expensive to print, quote unquote, at least in terms of producing on paper. Digital, there's not as much of a reason to let things go. Although I have to say that as a publisher and also an author, the contracts that I want do have reasonably aggressive out of print clauses so that the rights can revert to me if they're not selling particularly well. This is probably going to get too far into inside baseball, but I'm totally fine with everybody making money, even if it's just a little bit of money. But if it's not making money, then I want the rights to revert back to me somehow. And finding that balance of when is it enough money for a giant multinational conglomerate to keep something in print versus where you're looking at GT Labs, the publisher, right? I mean, I'll spin it around. This is the whole publishing empire right here, basically, except for a few boxes of books in the basement. So it's a difficult balance to strike, and there are a lot of spreadsheets involved, and I don't get to see all of them when it comes to Macmillan and stuff. I only get to see my own. So
I had times where I actually reached out to a publisher who had forgotten they had that book in their catalog. And I'll say, please send this to this librarian in Illinois. She's looking for it. Can you get it to her? And like, okay, they found a box in the closet. So sometimes just simply, if you can go to the website and find a live human being there somewhere, you will get a response on that. Hang on here. I'm gonna go back to our list of questions. Oh, this one that I liked was Stan Sakai puts research notes at the end of his books. By the way, his I think qualify as historical fiction for the Usagi Yojimbo. Are there STEM titles that explain the science behind the stories?
Well, I know Chris's do. And I would say, immodestly, I think mine do as well. So some are extensively endnoted and some are not. Just depends on the story. But, oh gosh. I should probably, I want to defer to Shari and Tracy. They've got a broader knowledge maybe than.
The one that stands out to me right now is, because we're trying to develop it for curriculum, is Cells at Work, as far as a manga that is, it blew me away when I stumbled upon it on Netflix, and it just blew me away. And then we got the manga to look at, but I mean, they've got pullouts, and they talk about specifically, you know, the detail that the story is talking about. So that's one of my current favorites right now.
Go ahead, Tracy. We got a 15-minute heads up, but go ahead, Trace.
the science comic books are all about the science behind the story. So those, it's embedded throughout the whole thing. But other books, this one I found called Math Scientist Academy, they will embed within the story, I don't know if you can see that, pieces where they're explaining what's going on. And then they'll add things at the back of the book that are more explanatory. But they're also explaining it as they go along. It's almost like Magic School Bus. You know, Miss Frizzle is explaining what goes on as they go through the adventure. And I think that that's a good model. And most of the books that I know, they either embed the science within the story itself because someone's explaining it to them or they're finding out about it, or they add something at the end or in there that will explain it to the kids.
Chris, did you want to add?
Yeah, so certainly in all the comics that science comics that I've created, I embed the science into the story. But there's others like Matt Hawkins' Think Tank. Like, he has a nice fictional story, and at the end he puts in what some of the science is from the story and gives links, you know, bibliography about, you know, what he found and where you can go dig and look up the information too. And I think he does that for all of his comics, not just the science ones that he writes, but yeah, so they're there.
Shari, sometimes you get people, I've had this conversation with a couple teachers who thought a book was out of reach for a kid. Is that a proper assumption? Or to me, I just felt like I could read whatever was in front of me if I just gave it enough time. Do you find that there are kids that take a moment to adapt and adjust and then?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we usually, the first time that, you know, we do it, you have to have sort of a scaffold in there of how to read a comic book. And so you know, you can't assume that all of your students grew up reading comics. And so, you know, that flow to the panels and, you know, it has to be taught. I mean, like anything else. But once they get it, it's, you know, but you cannot make that assumption that your students know how to read a comic. It is a skill.
I had a friend tell me it was fun to pick out the kid who learned how to skim to read to test.
Yeah.
Because they were the ones that were most frustrated by the crap. Tracy's got her hand up. Go ahead, Trace.
I was just going to say that was me. Like, that was me growing up for sure. And it's a little harder to do with a comic because you have to look at the pictures, you have to look at the words. And if you don't do both, like, I know somebody works in the comics industry who read The Dark Knight, got to the end, someone asked her a question about the story, and she said, oh, that didn't happen in the story, because she only read the words. Mm-hmm. So when you're getting a scientific concept out of a comic, you really have to pay a little more attention. You know, sometimes things are in the details, sometimes things are between the panels, in the gutter. Get your mind in the gutter, figure out what happened between here and here. So yeah, I think and I also, you know, I'm sure, Shari, you see this. I know so many kids who are intimidated by a wall of text. Yes. Right? And they won't even attempt it. At least with a comic, even if it's, you know, there's a lot of words in the bubbles, they'll try at least.
And that's the beauty with, like I said, with English language learners, that language acquisition usually lags behind, and a comic is just a beautiful way to get information across.
I got a great question here from Julie. Hang on here, Chris. I want to read this real quick because she went into detail and then brought in a question. I work as a school librarian at a STEM junior high school with an interest in design thinking. How would this thinking tie into comic books? Chris, you want to take the first swing at that?
For
design thinking.
So, I need to think about this for a moment.
Who wants to take a swing at that, Shari?
Maybe I can jump in real quick. And there are various books or even various pages or short sequences of panels that you could use to say, why did the writer, why did the artist choose to depict this thing, this idea, this scenario in this particular way? And I think I'm imagining that you could pick up any of the books sitting behind Shari or Tracy right now and find that sort of page or set of panels where you could use that as a tool to say, why show it this way rather than this way, than another way? And that is design thinking. If I'm understanding the question correctly, maybe I'm not.
I
Go ahead, Chris.
I was gonna say I agree with what Jim put up there. Like if you say you have a panel description of something, and you had several different kids in the class draw from the panel description, they're all probably going to draw it in various different ways, and then you could analyze it and see if it if they how they depicted it and what the strengths are of drawing it one way versus another, and that that very much is design thinking.
I would jump in with I've studied this a little bit, the actual process called design thinking. I believe it comes out of Stanford, but one of the first steps in the process is empathy. It's empathizing with whoever the audience is that you're going to be addressing with your design. And I think comics is great for that. I think if you can read comics and graphic novels about certain types of people or certain people with certain problems, having the facial expressions, the body language, along with the dialogue helps promote empathy with the people in the stories. So that's at one point in the process, you might be able to use it.
I was thinking if you wanted to go a little bit deeper, two books that all seem to be a fallback in almost every conversation are Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud and Drawing Words and Writing Pictures by Jessica Abel and Matt Madden.
Yep.
To get into those helps you understand the processes that are involved, and you have an even greater appreciation of the medium when you go. I read Scott's book every 2 years, I think now, just because there's always some new kind of thing that he still brings to this conversation. And that book's only what, 35 years old, I think, something like that. I don't want to date myself on this one, but yeah, but it still holds. It really, it's pretty amazing. Okay, we've got a few minutes left here. Oh, John Meyer recommends How-Toons.
Yes.
I
was going to say
yes.
That. Yeah.
Okay, we got nods. Yes, Jim, go ahead.
Oh yeah. No, just thumbs up on those. I think Nick Dragotta did a lot of them, but I think there have been other creators involved too, and they are all pretty terrific. They were a regular feature in the early issues of Make magazine, as I recall.
And they did a couple of big collected versions of those how-toons, which is how to make things. But they also did a series of comics that was a story. It was about kids in the apocalypse and making things, and that was super fun too, and had a lot of good engineering in it.
Shari, you want to take a swing at that?
Yeah, no, I was going to say How-Toons is good for that. There are, I'm blanking on it now. I can see the books in my head, but they almost look like blueprints. Tracy probably knows exactly what I'm talking about.
There she goes. She reads it.
There you go. Yeah. And
they are Maker Comics from the same publisher as the Science Comics.
Yeah.
And Chris Schweitzer from the book you just pulled up is from Kentucky.
And he's awesome.
He when he was doing the Krogan story, the first one was about democracy among pirates. And it was really pretty amazing. And it was fun to meet a creator who's also a summer stock theater actor. And he went into his process right in the middle of a lunch. And he started acting out the voices of each of the characters in the story. And it was so much fun to be right there in that moment. And if you ever have a chance to experience a conversation with Chris, experience, I think, is the best way to put it, right?
Oh, yeah.
All righty. So now, okay, Choose Your Own Adventures started making graphic novels too. Really? I did not know that. Oh, thank you, Neil. For younger kids, the Adventures in Cartooning series is great too. Thanks, Tracy. Appreciate you putting that up there. And they were in the latest previews. Thank you, Neil. As you can see, we're reading this live as they're coming up. All right, so I'm going to take a break here and let everybody have the 30 seconds of shameless self-promotion. We'll start with Shari.
So we are, like I said, scienceof.org. So we are a website with articles, resources. We currently have Matt wrote The Science of Rick and Morty, that is still out there and available for sale. And this is a
Hold on. Say that, slow down for me and say that again. The Science of Rick and Morty?
The Science of Rick and Morty. It came out about 1.5 years ago. It's on Amazon, and it is basically, it goes through episode by episode, and it talks about all the science that is in every episode. He's going to start with a new season coming out this summer. He's going to start doing just individual articles on the website just to try to keep it going.
Nice.
And then Tracy, I think, is a good segue because she's got the picture behind her of flashbacks. So that was another one that we were science consultants on that for DC Comics.
All right, Tracy, that's a handoff to you.
Yeah, flashbacks is awesome. Matt, Shari, and I all advised on that book. They wrote some great science activities in the back of it. Really cool book. Go to readingwithpictures.org. That's a sort of a clearinghouse of ideas and information about using comics in education. We are working on updating that website, hoping to have that up soon. You can go to my website, tracyedmunds.com. I have all kinds of links to recorded panels with experts talking about using comics. And in my resources section, I have the most popular thing in there is the list of research and reasons for using comics in education. There are also title lists, and I'll put some more in there.
Mr. Preece, go ahead.
All right, you can catch me at chrispreece.org, which is my campaign hub website. And you can also, as I make my track towards, getting into U.S. Congress for Kentucky's 6th District. And there's also links in there to my science comics that I've made.
Hold on a little bit longer. There we go. Oh, you're frozen, so we're good. All right, Jim.
I have a couple books out, a couple pandemic books out. What a great time to put out comics. I did a book called Astronauts about women astronauts for younger. Oh, Tracy, are you going to help me out? Thank you.
Tracy brought the props.
Thanks. I did an adaptation recently with E.O. Wilson, the biologist, the ant guy, of his memoir called Naturalist. This was supported by the Sloan Foundation, and it was super fun to do. And so that's just out in October. In a couple weeks, the paperback version of Hawking will arrive, and I'm very happy about that. And I have a whole bunch of other projects waiting in the wings. Einstein will be the next biography. Apparently, it's a contractual obligation for anybody who writes about science to eventually do a graphic novel about Albert Einstein. So we're doing one. And that's probably 2022. And you can find me at gt-labs.com on the web, or I'm at GTLabsRat. Thanks to my wife for suggesting that Twitter handle. If you want to find out more.
Nice.
And what about Carl Sagan?
What's that?
I saw a quick chat come up. What about
Carl Sagan? Yes. You have a book on Carl Sagan as well?
I have this little notebook with story ideas in it. Maybe it won't surprise you that that name is in that notebook.
Nice.
Who knows?
Field notes are amazing.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well, and shameless plug, of course, for LibraryPass. We have so many resources that are posted for free there. We also have tutorials, all kinds of Q&A type of projects that you can go to that will help answer a lot of these questions that we didn't get to. LibraryPass.com. You guys, thank you very much. Shari, Jim, Tracy, Chris, sincerely appreciate your time, and everybody who joined us this evening. On behalf of LibraryPass and Comics Plus, my name is John Shableski. I'm your host, and enjoy the rest of your week, folks. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I learned a ton.
Thank you.
Thank you.